Hello, my name is Nick McCarthy. I'm the Director of Programming at NewFest, and thank you for joining us for this exciting virtual conversation. We're really super excited to be hosting this conversation around BIPOC queer films. This is, of course, called our BIPOC Queer Film Canon Kiki. We've assembled a panel of wonderful, brilliant minds who are all brilliant critics. I know that I have my Letterboxd account open and ready to track every single film that is discussed today. So I hope you have a pen and paper ready or your watch list getting together to watch after NewFest, of course. So I want to also thank one of our partners on this program, GALECA, who are the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics. I know that all 4 panelists today are members of GALECA. It's a really wonderful organization that helps increase the visibility of queer voices. And I think it's very important that queer film have queer critics also reviewing them. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce the moderator for today's conversation, Farihah Zaman.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, NewFest, for having me for this particular roundtable. It's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to talk to the other panelists today. My name's Farihah Zaman. I'm a filmmaker and also a critic. I like to go back and forth over that line. I've written for Film Comment, Elle Magazine, Filmmaker Magazine, but most frequently these days, I'm a staff writer at Reverse Shot, which is a great online film journal. If you haven't heard of it, and in particular, one of the editors, Michael Koreski, has been doing a longtime column called Queer and Now and Then that we sometimes explore on a weekly Zoom happy hour that we do with Museum of the Moving Image. So you can go to the Museum of the Moving Image website if you'd like to catch that Wednesdays at 5 p.m. EST. We have a lot of cute queer guests on. And it would be a great way to extend the conversation today. But I would love to bring in our guests and start having them introduce themselves. I'm going to go by, I don't know if everybody's view is the same, but I'm going to start with my clockwise. So Kyle, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here. My name is Kyle Turner, and I'm a freelance writer based in Brooklyn, and I've written for places like GQ, Paste Magazine, and New York Times.
Great. Tre'vell, say hello.
Hi, everyone. I am Tre'vell Anderson, entertainment journalist, critic, podcaster. I have 12 million jobs and have written for entirely too many people to name. So I'll just leave it there.
Google Tre'vell. Valerie, I think you might be joining us from the furthest away today, which adds an exciting little touch to the discussion.
I'm not gonna disclose to the
No, it's your business.
public, but, yeah, my name is Valerie Complex, and I'm a film critic and soon to be author once my book get published. And I've written for Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, IGN, The Nerdist, and The Playlist, and a couple of other places that I've written for. And thank you to NewFest for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Jourdain, can you tell us about yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Jourdain Searles. I live in Queens in New York. I'm a screenwriter, I'm a podcaster, I'm a comedian, and I'm a critic. I've written for Vanity Fair, New York Times, Vulture, The Ringer. I write for Bitch Media a lot, and I always like to shout them out because their editorial team is amazing. So, yeah.
Cool. What an illustrious group. Well, I'm sure that you all have been thinking about this, not just in the week leading up to the panel, but maybe all your lives, as I have, which is, what are the films, the BIPOC about and by BIPOC films that we appreciate that are part of the queer canon, but also those that we wish would be part of the queer canon. And I wonder if you could start by talking about a few that you know are beloved and deserve it.
Well, I mean, when I decided to join this panel, the first thing I thought was I wanted to ask the question, and I mean, I feel like it's rhetorical. I feel like we know why, but why isn't there a Greg Araki box set. It's ridiculous. It's like
I feel like the queer community accepts Greg Araki and their body of work as one of our own more than the like film community understands his work as such, in a way that's confusing to me.
Yeah. I mean, you can watch Nowhere on YouTube, and that Nowhere might be the hardest one to find, like in terms of like physical media. But yeah, Nowhere, The Doom Generation, Totally Fucked Up, The Living End, like, and for the
Whitebird in a Blizzard. Whitebird in a Blizzard.
Yes, well, yes,
With
also
Ava Green.
Whitebird in a Blizzard, and Splendor, which is also on YouTube. That's also one of the few places that you can watch Splendor. And like he was kind of like my introduction to queer film, because his films used to play on cable all the time when, you know, syndication and reruns were a thing. They're a thing of the past now.
Yeah.
But I just love how weird they are. Oh yeah, Kaboom also. Like, it's such a vast filmography, and it's such an interesting and diverse stories that he tells, and they're just weird. And I love how just weird they are. None of them are like coming out stories or kind of like the kind of stuff that we're used to. A lot of the films that are coming out now at festivals and stuff, I notice a lot of coming out movies. And like, those are great, but I kind of like the ones where like people are like already having sex.
Like, yeah, we like do other things with our lives, and it would be great if that was also reflected on screen. But I also think you bring up a great point, Jourdain, that, you know, queer is not just about sex and sexuality, right? Like the idea of there being a queer perspective and that bringing something to the film work. Like, I think Greg Araki is a great example of that, where he's just like, I don't care about the rules necessarily. Like, this is how I'm going to tell the story. And as a result, it has a really unique way of resonating for people.
Yeah. The first thing that came to my mind was Farihah. Was Dee Reese. I like her work. And I think Farihah was the first time that I actually saw myself within a narrative. Even down to the placement of like how the character was dressing and where she was living.
Yeah.
And so I related to it like closely, and still one of my favorite movies. And, you know, in my top 5 queer, you know, films of all time. I just think that just canon, and it's not talked about enough. In the same vein, like a film like Moonlight is, which is another one of my favorites.
I mean, Farihah starts with My Neck, My Back, which I feel like any movie that starts with that should be discussed frequently, all the time. Because, like, I feel like there should be, it reminds me of how, like, there are different ways to show Black queerness. And I would love to see, like, I don't know, like, the kind of Black queerness that's also kind of like hip hop and like sexual, and I feel like hip hop culture and queerness need to come together more in movies. What do you think, Tre'vell?
I agree with you. I mean, I feel like when I think of, you know, those things that like already make up the canon, I feel like for me, a big filmmaker in the documentary space is Marlon Riggs. Black is Black Ain't, Ethnic Notions, etc. Those for me were a lot of the first kind of queer films that I consumed as a budding queer and trans person. And I feel like Marlon Riggs is somebody we know exists, but, you know, I don't hear his name often much when we have these conversations. I'll also throw out Cheryl Dunye with The Watermelon Woman as another foundational text for how she was, you know, writing Black women, right, in herself as a Black queer woman into history, into Hollywood history. So those are the films that immediately come to mind for me. What about for you, Kyle? Your last.
Kind of counterpoint to Marlon Riggs, Portrait of Jason, the Shirley Clarke documentary, which has this really fascinating friction between its subject and its director, who's a white Jewish woman, and is acting in this provocation towards this Black queer performer and hustler, and that was always very interesting to me, and a fairly early example of me seeing like non-white queers on screen. And The Wedding Banquet, the Ang Lee film, which I've always felt was more interesting and more nuanced. Not to necessarily put them in competition, but I thought it was more fascinating than Brokeback Mountain because it had these two people, one of whom was Taiwanese and one who was white, figuring out how to negotiate their relationship in terms of tradition, in terms of having to play straight for their parents. And I thought it was, by kind of framing it as this comedy of manners, I always thought that was really quite fun and moving as well.
I've been meaning to watch that. That's on my list.
Oh, it's so good. And they're both hot.
Oh, well, that's important.
I wanted to ask you guys, a metric, what do you use as a metric to determine like queer cinema? Because I'm thinking about a film, I'm thinking about Night Comes On. I don't know what I keep thinking about. I'm thinking about Night Comes On, where it has queer elements, but the queerness isn't the center of the story. So are we allowed to mention those type of films as well? Or is it like, let's only talk about, where the overwhelming arc is like focused on queerness in some way?
Well, I don't think that a queer film is like just specifically like the plot is centered around that. Like, I think that there are different ways to communicate queerness, like cinematically through visuals and through, through the storytelling and kind of like just aesthetically. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen Night Comes On, but I do think that it's important to talk about films that have queer elements. Because if I would have known that there were queer elements in Night Comes On, I would have watched it earlier. It's been on my queue forever, but now I'm going to watch it.
I mean, they're not huge within the film.
Well, and also, like, we know that one of the things that critics can do is...
Dang.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no. We should keep talking and see if she comes back.
Yes.
I feel like that's a smart thing to do. I was remembering though, Valerie, when you were talking about DVDs, I want to talk about Bessie, which I adore. I'm obsessed with Bessie, mostly just because, like, as like a plus size queer woman, I almost never see like plus size queer Black women doing anything. And for Bessie, like, just Monique in the suits, I could talk about Monique in that suit forever.
Incredible.
It's just incredible. Like, she's so hot in the movie for me. Queen Latifah is like incredibly hot for me in that movie. Like, even when she's like dealing with like men and all of their bullshit, like, I'm still just like entranced by how hot she is, how like physical and like tender her like sexual interactions with her female partner are, and just like the way that queerness informs the way that she even performs her music and how she feels about herself in that film.
That's why I'm curious to see Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and see how much the aspect of, from what I know about history, she was a bisexual woman. So I'm curious to see how that plays into the film at large. Because, I'm not only thinking about like, queer cinema that's been out or that's released or whatever, but I'm thinking about the future as well and things that I know are supposed to be coming. And that's one of them. So I wonder what that's going to look like.
You brought up Jourdain, you brought up Queen Latifah, and I feel like a film that we don't talk enough about as like being canonical for queer representation, at least for me, which is Set It Off.
I knew that you were gonna say Set It Off.
Like, we just don't, if we look at it as, I feel like this like classical Black film, but like, I mean, it recently just got put on Netflix, and watching it back again, I'm like, you know, Queen Latifah is like her and her sexuality and her partner in that movie. While I think, you know, there's some critiques that can be had about, you know, all of that, I think that is another example of like one of those films that, you know, is very ever present in Black communities, that shows that, you know, Blackness and queerness like move at the same time in a lot of spaces.
Yeah.
I definitely like that idea of Set It Off being a part of the main canon, because I think it's easy to see Set It Off as like a heist movie, as an action movie. And the element of queerness sort of gets lost in the background because people are focusing on the action.
I mean, Queen Latifah is like such a force in that movie, and even like her death, I feel like should be like one of the like if there's like a list of like iconic screen deaths, like she chooses the way that she wants to die.
Yes.
Like she's got just like the cigarette in her mouth and just like
incredible.
It's so amazing. And I just love, I mean, Queen Latifah is one of those people that I knew was queer since I was like very young, before she even came out. And so I always had that reading whenever I would see her. Yeah.
Which goes to what Valerie mentioned, right? Of like, you know, these elements of queerness that we sometimes pick up on in people and in films and shows, even though it may not be, you know, something expressed. Kyle, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say I saw Set It Up for the first time in a movie theater earlier this year, and it was just like such a mind-blowing experience.
Yeah, it's so good.
Oh God.
Yeah, I talked about it on the Bechtel cast, and I could have talked about it forever. It's so good. A person that I wanted to mention, because I make a lot of letterbox lists. It's what I do when I want to procrastinate and calm my nerves. And I made one on Black queer film, and I of course included Patrick Ian Polk.
Yeah.
Who you know, he's directed many films like Blackbird and The Skinny and Punks.
Yes.
But he also created Noah's Ark. And for me, Noah's Ark was like the first show that I ever watched with like, you know, like more than one Black queer person on it. And I find it to be really interesting that like we never talk about him. I think it's like, I almost feel like there's like a bit of snobbery going on, which is why we don't talk about him. And so, because I remember when I put him on the list, somebody like messaged me, like a friend of mine. They were just like, I know him, and he's gonna be so happy that he got mentioned because no one talks about him. And I was like, I feel so bad.
I think there's also like an elitism as far as like Noah's Ark having been on Logo and that not being considered like a prestige TV channel or something.
I loved Logo. I grew up on Logo. Like, I grew up.
And I'll just add that I think, you know, Patrick Ian Polk I often say that like he's like a father or a grandfather or a godfather or something of like Black queer cinema in particular, because you mentioned Punks. Punks was like the precursor to Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was like iterated off of Punks, and I feel like Punks was one of those first movies that I saw, right, that was like narrative based with like Black queer people in a Black queer world, right, where like they weren't the sassy best friend, they weren't like the addition onto a story, it was their particular story. And Punks debuted at Sundance in 2000. And one of the things I often like to bring up, looking at Patrick Ian Polk's career trajectory versus somebody else who, for example, had their first film also debut at Sundance in 2000, which is Greg Berlanti. And we see where the two different careers are. And that's no shade.
Was that Broken Hearts Club?
Yes.
Yeah, you see, I saw Broken Hearts Club a bunch of times, like way more than like Patrick Ian's work comes up. Yeah.
You can't even find Punks a lot of places.
And you also see like the sort of telegraphing within Berlanti's films as far as what is a queer norm or a gay norm, so to speak. And I don't think that's by accident.
A lot of films can tend to fall in that category. And I still think what's happening is people are still defining what queerness is and what that looks like in cinema. And it's really different for everybody. I feel one of the films that comes to mind, especially one of the newer films I think about, is Rafiki, which doesn't get talked about enough. And I don't really know why. But then also I think Rafiki goes back to the idea that when it comes to women of color, especially Black women who are in, same-sex relationships, it's always based around trauma. Like Black women don't get the favorites and the disobedience stuff. We get the abuse, and nothing is ever just sort of straightforward. There are a lot of good shorts out there, like Felicia Pride's short Tender, which is really good, about just two Black women who have a one-night stand and stuff like that. But I guess I would say Watermelon Woman is like an exception.
Watermelon Woman, and also like Cheryl Dunye's short films are also really great. If you get a chance to watch them.
But it's always drama, and it's like,
well, I think that's why Shakedown is so, like, I was so excited about Shakedown. I love Shakedown so much. I feel like a lot of like non-fiction queer films is kind of like telling the kinds of stories that you're saying that you want. Like, I feel like in narrative, a lot of them are definitely like more serious, especially when it has to do with Black people. But then in documentary, I feel like there's a lot of fun. So like Shakedown is so fun, and it's just like centering Black lesbians. I also really like Kiki, which is kind of like a spiritual child to Paris is Burning. But I really enjoyed Kiki, and I feel like that's one that I want more people to talk about, because it's like right there on Hulu. You can watch it. It's just been sitting there. So those
Valerie,
are great docs.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think I want to try to blend your threads together, because Valerie, to your point, as far as growing definitions and negotiations of what queerness can be, especially kind of manifested or executed through like the language of film itself, and then through nonfiction. I think Shirker is a really interesting example, which is about this young woman in Indonesia, I believe, who is trying to make a short film, and it's her kind of looking back on these memories. All the footage ends up being stolen by like this professor friend, basically, and through the footage that we're watching in her journey to kind of understand why she's so obsessed about kind of recovering this footage and finishing the job that she started out when she was a teenager with her friends, there's this idea of longing through some sort of tactility, which I think is really fascinating. Longing for something that exists beyond bodies, so to speak. And it's not, there's no, one of the subjects in the documentary, I believe, is LGBTQ, but it's not sort of the focus. But I think this idea of what longing, desire can be, transcending bodies in and of themselves, I think is really fascinating in that film.
And I've learned a lot about what queer cinema is and how to define it for myself from all of you, reading your reviews. And Kyle, we had that discussion about a couple months ago about the same or similar subject. And I'm still sort of learning what it is for me, outside of the typical stuff, the obvious things, the things like Love, Simon or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it does take a little digging, even if the films are recent. Like, I recently reviewed. I did a talk. I'm obsessed with it. Rodney Evans' most recent documentary, Vision Portraits, which is about queerness and blindness, and I am half blind and queer, and so watching that was like the first time that I ever saw like blind queer people doing anything. And I mean, it's so beautiful because a lot of it just like plays with the way that we see. Like, I'm blind in one eye, so I can't see this, like this entire area is closed off to me. So I have to turn a lot. I have to do like a lot of like head turning. And so the way that the film is structured, we are able to see some of those. Like, if like Rodney his vision is about like down here. So there are points where we can only see like slivers of what he's looking at. And sometimes there are like bigger ones. And it was so interesting because I remember writing stories about myself in high school, just like doodling and like trying to imagine if people could see the way that I saw. And it was just like, it was interesting because like society really like grapples with all of these separate identities, but they don't think about like, what if they were all together? So I think about that a lot. And also Rodney Evans, his film Brother to Brother premiered, I believe, at Sundance in 2004. And it's interesting that like it was so long ago and I'd never heard of it until I saw Vision Portraits. And it makes me wonder like how we treat our queer directors of color, like the fact that we don't really talk about them enough, and it's like they're working in obscurity when they shouldn't be. Like he got an award at that festival. He got an award like presented by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and like yet it took like 15 years for me to figure out who he was. It's weird.
But part of that, right, is because of I feel like when the default when we're talking about canonical films, right, it's like particularly in the queer space, it's like the white queer experience. Right. And any other intersection identity, whether you're a woman, whether you're trans, whether you're blind, whether you are otherwise, abled, if you like, all of these other things that, queer folks can be, then it's a lot more difficult to even see those stories pop up. Like I think often about Courtney Ziegler, who did a documentary back in 2008 called Still Black, a portrait of Black trans men, and like we don't talk enough about the transmasculine experience when we're talking about queer cinema and what is canonical versus what is not.
Well, a lot of times, and this happens in the writing space as well, it's like if you've ticked one minority box, people feel like they're one and done. Like,
right.
Great, you did it. I can't make this about everything, And I've had this happen on panels where I've heard people say like, well, I thought this was the women in film panel, not the women in color film panel, stuff like that. And that's why I'm glad you bring up like this moment where there was like kind of a renaissance of like queer BIPOC voices, particularly queer Black voices. It's like late 90s, early aughts time. There's a great book by a filmmaker named Yvonne Welbon called Sisters in the Life that's about Black queer non-male filmmakers during that time. It's like it's all people who if they looked different, they'd all be household names by now. Everyone you mentioned, including Cheryl Dunye.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, Angela Robinson just dropped in my head.
Yes.
We don't talk enough about her either, in my opinion.
Yes, and she's been working for a while.
Consistently too, right?
Yeah, she does a whole bunch of stuff, producing, directing, writing, like she does it all.
While I dipped out due to technical errors, though I'm so glad I wasn't needed. Did anybody talk about the film Saving Face? This is one that I had.
I want to bring that one
love
up.
Saving Face.
Love Saving Face.
Yes.
Speaking of like films that don't get talked about enough, this would be rom-com canonical if it did not happen to be about a queer couple, and also that it's very, very rooted in a particular perspective, this like Asian American diasporic perspective, that even as a different kind of Asian person, as a South Asian person, I still saw so much. You started, Valerie, by talking about the first time you see yourself on screen. That's one of the first time I remember feeling like my family experience with my like queer identity felt accurately represented.
Yeah.
And I'm sad that it took Alice Wu. That I'm glad that she was able to return to filmmaking after 14, 15 years with the half of it, which I think is just such a glorious encapsulation of trying to find yourself and who you could be and who you want to be through writing.
And it's sort of an interesting corollary to Love, Simon.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like if we're gonna talk about the teen space and this like sort of finding yourself, coming out drama, like I think it's a much more nuanced version of that story.
Oh, totally.
Mhm.
Also,
Absolutely.
also, Love, Simon takes place in a version of Georgia that does not exist.
I don't know. Is it me? But I feel like, I don't know. It just feels it seems like studios are now realizing how popular queer films can be. So it seems like every studio is rushing to get in that thing that is the next this and the next that. And it all comes out being like real flimsy. And I thought I thought Love, Simon, which was wildly popular, I was like, I'm unclear as to why it's popular. But I mean, I guess for people, I guess it does connect to a certain demographic, and that's great and that's fine. And I'm happy for them. But it made me think about a lot of these queer films that are out that don't have any connection anywhere, that they just exist because somebody wanted to check a box and say, this is what I did for the community. Look at me. I'm an ally. This is what I did, and so on and so forth. And it's really kind of jarring to see those kind of narratives. Nothing comes to mind right now, but I'm sure something will come up.
Jenny's Wedding comes to mind for
I was
me.
just gonna say, I did as a reverse shot offensive that year because it was so disturbing seeing like a mainstreaming of queerness that just doesn't reflect our reality.
I don't believe anyone in that movie has ever had sex. It's so upsetting.
Kind.
And just like I think about the queer movies of old, the 2000 ones with like Ella Undone and Chasing Amy and all these really strange films that I saw that I found just so strange and disconnected from anything, not just the experience, but the human experience. I'm like, are these people on Earth? Like what? Like,
the Chasing Amy defender has logged on. Like, I don't even know if we have enough time to get into it, but I personally, I think a lot of the films like Chasing Amy and stuff are made for people who have no idea what queerness is. And it's not for us entirely. Like when I watch Chasing Amy, I'm not thinking this is my experience. I'm like, well, I'm thinking this is my experience talking to straight people about my experience. And in that respect, I really like Chasing Amy because she's explaining very basic shit and nobody can handle it, which is why Kevin Smith made the movie, by the way. He used to date Joey Lauren Adams, who plays Alyssa Jones, and their relationship didn't work mostly because he couldn't deal with the fact that she slept with women and had threesomes because he was super Catholic. So he kind of made the movie as kind of like an apology to her. And when you know that, it makes the movie make a lot more sense. Anyway.
Are there any more recent films that you want to start championing now so that 10 years from now no one's saying, why did this get overlooked?
If I may, I would like to champion Andrew An's Spa Night.
Oh my God, yes.
Incredible film about this young Korean man whose parents run a restaurant, and he feels the pressure of socializing into a very conventional form of masculinity, and wants to go to or feels the imperative to go to college. And in order to support his family, he goes to work at a Korean spa, and kind of comes in contact with his first experiences of queerness there, and is trying to figure out how to reconcile with that. And there's this one really gorgeous shot where he's just kind of looking in the mirror, and Jeremy O'Harris, the really superb playwright, was like, sometimes coming out to yourself is just what you need to do, and it's just like you looking in the mirror and just sort of saying that to yourself without wordlessly, but acknowledging it for your own sake.
Yeah.
Yes, Spotlight is amazing. Andreon's latest film, I think it's called Driveways, is also one of those films that I feel like has a little bit of queer energy to it, even though it's not, you know, the center of it. I want to add Sydney Freeland's Drunk Town's Finest. Not sure if anyone saw it. Came out, I think, in 2014. Sydney Freeland is a trans indigenous filmmaker, and a lot of her work brings that perspective into it. And I think that she's been doing some really interesting things with her work, but also, you know, she works in television as well and bringing her perspective to some of those spaces. So I just wanted to throw her name out there as well.
That's great. We have a couple more minutes. Valerie, Jourdain, any titles you want to throw in there?
Okay, so I'm kind of biased because I went to NYU with him, but I have to talk about Elegance Bratton because number one, love that king. Like, love him. I hope he watches this. I hope he knows. But Peer Kids is so good. And it's like, it's playing the festivals this year, so it's not available yet. But please, like, keep an eye out for Elegance Bratton. Love his work. And also Javon James, who I also went to NYU with. Keep up with him. His short film, Buck, is also making its rounds in the festivals right now. And I think they're both really interesting.
Heartily agree.
I saw something recently that I really liked, Monsoon, with Henry Golding, and it was directed by Hong Kao. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I just thought that it tackled identity from various places, because it was like he's looking for his home and everything, but then he, you know, he's also, the lead character is also queer. So I just thought it tackled the very idea of queerness from different angles. And I really liked it. It's on Netflix. I believe. Yeah.
These are all great. I haven't seen all the things you've mentioned. I'm also making notes along with everybody else. I would throw Rafiki in there. I thought when, you know, we're talking about having a particular sense of style, it's not just like, look, it's a lesbian story, but like the whole thing visually is imbued with, you know, their culture, their youth culture. I really, that put a smile on my face during these quarantine days. I think it's streaming on Criterion. Well, thanks so much, everyone. This was really nice to gather virtually and talk about the films we love.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Great day. Stick around for the next live stream from NewFest.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.